Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about myself. My name is Nicole Shabazz. I consider myself a youth library, literacy, literature learning professional. I've worked in education my entire career, which is now, I think I'm in my 23rd, 24th year in education. I started out as a high school social studies teacher, loved that tremendously. But during that time, I really saw a decline in boys in particular, in terms of just their luster for school, let's say in general, and reading. Oh my goodness, there were a dearth of students who would really be engaged around reading. In particular, most of my high school experience as an educator was with ninth graders. And one of the things that we know statistically is that between ninth grade and 10th grade is where you have the highest dropout rate for African-American males in particular. And so we knew that that was a critical place in their education that we really had to try to turn the tide. And so just for myself, I've always been a reader. And I understood that a subject like social studies, which is date-driven, chronological, very much a reading subject, kind of mirrored some of the struggles that language arts was having, reading teachers were having, because as you might imagine, because so many males were not at the level of proficiency they needed to be successful in school, they were also having to take a remedial reading class. You know, I came to understand that reading was going to be the key to make those adjustments, but how to get these boys interested in particular. Now, you know, the issue of reading underachievement affects, you know, children of color, African-American and Latino children in particular, in general, but in particular, you know, males. And so I just quickly understood that part of it was about connecting the dots for our boys of color. I always understood that reading was an act of resistance, agency, and affirmation. And so having the success that I had.
Well, I'm gonna write that down.
Yeah, having this
agency and affirmation. Yes, indeed.
Absolutely, yes. Absolutely. Being mindful, again, connecting those dots and being mindful that we are a people where reading was a crime, and reading could be punishable by physical, very, very physical punishment, or it could be fatal to be a reader. And so being able to connect those dots and allow our young people to know that the power, the act of reading really is about saying to people who said you cannot and you will not, that yes, we can. So, and having those specific, honest conversations with young people. And so once I started to make those connections, what I realized is that being a classroom teacher limited me to just a small group of children. And so I knew as a reader, again, reading being kind of that key to open the golden door, that if I could embark on a profession that allowed me to reach a greater number of students, but also allowed me to reach practitioners, other educators who needed these tools, then I could be more effective in my practice. And so the knowledge of reading and what it entails, we also have to say to our students that sometimes it's information and sometimes it's misinformation. But if you're a critical reader, the more you read, you're able to discern. What I always say, one of my big hashtags is facts over fiction, you know, so that you are able to make that determination. And so I moved in maybe after about a decade of teaching in the classroom. I got the training to become a school librarian. And so I did that for about 4 or 5 years. And after my children were grown, I had 4 daughters. after they were grown, I moved back to Cleveland, where I'm originally from. So born in Washington, D.C., but I always say bred in Cleveland. Cleveland is home. I was there since I was about 5 years old. And so I moved back home and had an opportunity to work for the Cleveland Public Library. They had just created a position where they were actually looking for a school librarian to kind of be the liaison between the public library world and the school world to make better inroads. I think that was a groundbreaking decision on their part. Very few public libraries had done anything like that at the time, and I see that growing now, but they really were, you know, kind of the trailblazers in that area, and I ticked all the boxes. And so having that relationship, because I understood schools and how schools operate, I was able to enter the public library world and be able to have relationships with youth librarians in the public library sphere. So there are similarities, but there are differences. And so in a school library situation, of course, you have a number of children who are on the roll and you will engage because you're a part of that infrastructure. You know you're going to either see those students because they're on a class schedule or because you're having a collaborative experience with a teacher. So that's understood in the school K through 12 library world. Well, in the public library, it's a little different because you don't have specific children on roll per se, but you have children in your community. You have children that will come to the library because of the proximity of their schools. And so what I would always say to my fellow school librarians is we have a captive audience that we have to connect through reading. But what I said to my public library colleagues is you have an opportunity now to captivate an audience when they come into the public library space. No, they're not on your roll. No, you can't mark them absent if they don't come, but you want to compel these young people to want to be in your libraries on a daily basis. And so having the opportunity to work with that group of professionals was very eye-opening. It was very enriching for me, but it helped me see a lot of the kind of pitfalls that were existing in public libraries and school libraries. And it made me know that the relationship that those two had to have is absolutely necessary. And
is
I was
that how you got
glad.
to your, is that how you got to deciding to write your book, Engaging?
Yeah, so absolutely. So thanks for that, because that was just about to plug the book. So what ended up happening is I had an opportunity at the Public Library Association National Conference in 2016 to give a presentation. My presentation was accepted, and the presentation was titled "Where the Black and Brown Boys Aren't and Why." Because one of the things that I started to see, even when I saw children in our library branches, and so I worked with youth librarians who worked with children. So I didn't necessarily have the opportunity to work with children every day as I had once done as a school librarian. But as I was visiting our 27 branches in the main library, I had an opportunity to see that our boys, again, even when they came into the library, they wanted to get on the computer. They didn't want to necessarily engage around reading. They didn't want to be in a book talk. And so I knew, again, knowing those stats and knowing that we had to reach these boys, we really had to begin an honest conversation about how we need to make shifts in both our public and school libraries to attract our boys, to turn that tide. And so that proposal was accepted. I went on to give that presentation. There were over 300 public library professionals who attended. It was one of the top 10 presentations during the conference. And so that also said to me, this is an important topic throughout the nation, and our youth librarians want to do well in this work. And so for me, it was just kind of a gift. I had no desire, hadn't thought about writing a book or anything. I'm a person out there in the trenches and I'm doing the work. I was approached by a publishing company because they saw the proposal and they liked what the topic was about, and they asked me to write the book. And so I kind of drug my feet on that a little bit because I'm always doing 101 things. And I had a family member to say to me, do you know how much of a blessing that is? People are running around here trying to get book deals all the time, and a book deal has come to you. You
Fell in
have
your lap,
something.
as they say.
Yes, fell in my lap. And like she said, you know, you have an opportunity to use your talents and your skills to connect with other people in your profession to help make a difference for Black boys. And you got to get on that. And that was the fire that I needed. And I was actually traveling from Phoenix back to Cleveland. And so that 4-hour flight, I wrote my proposal and submitted that for the book, you know, and was able to receive that book deal. So
now you got to tell us the title.
Yes, so the title of this
how
book.
You got there. Now, what's the name of the book so we can go get it?
Yeah, so the title of the book is Engaging Boys of Color in the Library, Proven Strategies for Reading Achievement. That book will be available summer 2021. And so I was just at the cusp of finishing up the book, you know, in its draft form right before COVID hit. And so I have 8 chapters in the book originally, but what has happened with COVID compelled me even further. So now what was an 8-chapter book will be a 10-chapter book, because I will be talking about many of the inequities that have been illuminated as it relates to technology and engagement around reading in this virtual space, and what we must do to make sure if we ever have a situation similar to what we're dealing with now, we're able to tackle it head on.
So now I have many questions, right? One, I'll say, you brought up the fact that Cleveland kind of innovated on the library positioning.
Yes.
For school libraries. And I just want to say, you know, like you, I'm from Cleveland. We kind of have the opposite story, right? I lived in Cleveland until I was 5 and then moved to New York. So my mother says that I am a New York girl with a Midwest reality.
Yeah.
And I used to have a blog that was actually titled that. So, and so, you know, my background is that my grandfather's an educator. He was a 30-year educator. He taught at Max Hayes. So if some of y'all went to Max Hayes in the 80s, you might know my grandfather, Sam Jones. My grandmother was a social worker in the Cleveland public schools. And both of them were voracious readers.
Yes.
They read all the time. There was constantly a book they were reading. Their sons were readers. I'm a reader. But
so
I
they modeled reading.
Right. I did notice the boys in my family are not readers, though. You know, like the younger guys are not necessarily readers. And what I've learned when growing up in Cleveland, there's the education side, but my grandfather also, you know, drove me around Cleveland, and that's how I got into community development. And one thing I can say is Cleveland has always been at the cusp of innovation.
Yes.
So when folks in Cleveland are like, "Oh, we don't do," I'm like, "No, y'all do lots of cool stuff."
That's right. So, don't sleep on C-Town.
Don't sleep on C-Town. I send people to Cleveland all the time. They'd be like, "Man, I had a ball." I'm like, oh.
Yes.
So we have a lot in common, you and I. You working with trying to engage Black boys in reading, and demonstrating to them that it is an act of resistance. It's not just a job. It is not just, you know, something that girls do, right?
Exactly.
And I run Brothers Empowered to Teach. Well, I co-founded it with my partner Larry, and so Brothers Empowered to Teach's mission is to do something similar, which is to attach men in college to their own education so that they can then take their educational success and model it for young people in classrooms, right?
Wonderful.
And so you were saying that in high school, the dropout is 9th or 10th grade. We always say it's as early as 8th grade, right? And we know that in New Orleans, for example, people start dropping out in 8th grade. By the way, I live in New Orleans.
Yeah.
And for our college students, we know that Black men drop out. They tend to drop out in sophomore year. So there's like 2 sophomore periods.
Right.
So we get them through high school, then they get to college and they drop out sophomore year.
Exactly.
And so for our work is in some ways, teaching is an act of resistance, if you think about it.
Absolutely.
Right? Especially if you're a Black educator in the current school system. So like how I got to doing the work that I do at Brothers Empowered to Teach is really kind of serendipitous. I moved to New Orleans in 2010. A friend of mine moved here right after we got out of graduate school. She and I started graduate school the day Katrina happened, or maybe we were moving to New Orleans. We were moving to New York. I was moving back to New York the day Katrina happened, and I was immobile.
Yes.
My good friend Casey and I had a friend named Mary who was at Tulane in New Orleans, and we wanted to get in the car and go down to New Orleans and find her and do all the things because we're Leos. And my friend Maurice stopped us, and but I ended up at the new school where they did an entire course on sort of disaster economy, right? Because
Okay.
that's one of the things that sort of drives the economy in America is disasters.
Oh,
And so something in my spirit since I was 18 said come to New Orleans, and so I finally did. And when I came here, I came to do community development, right?
okay.
And my influence for doing community development and housing was Cleveland, because my grandfather drove me around Cleveland on the summers when I would come visit and talk about like what Cleveland was like, all the infrastructure that was there, how the Black middle class got created and grew in Cleveland, and about the different policies and things that, like you were talking about equity, that made inequitable things happen in the city,
Right.
right? And so that's how I got to planning. And when I got here, I was considered a carpetbagger, like a lot of other
Oh,
people who
yeah.
moved to New Orleans post Katrina. But long story short, I moved here to do that work, and I met my partner Larry, who is my business partner. And he kind of challenged me, right? Like because my dad worked for IBM, I moved around a lot, so I'm used to being in new places and making new friends or having to figure it out. But he gave me a different perspective about New Orleans, and I think that really helped me understand the city and also connect with people. And I think that like what's common in both of our work is you need to be able to make connection, right?
Absolutely.
If you want Black boys to read, they need to feel connected to you. They need to feel like it's not you just kind of bearing down on them like read. You must read so you can pass this test. And well, that doesn't connect, right?
Right.
And so we started talking about his experience growing up as a Black boy in New Orleans, which is similar to lots of Black boys growing up in Cleveland and growing up in Atlanta and growing up in other places, right?
Yeah.
And the
city,
violence,
any urban city.
right? And the violence they see, and the friends they lose, and the bifurcated conscience of like street versus academics, right?
Exactly.
And I had no intention of working in education. I'm not a teacher. Like, I'm not a teacher, right? I'm a banker.
You are.
I mean, I am internally a teacher, but that's not the career I chose, right? Like, I've always been a teacher. I'm good at getting people to understand things, right?
Yes.
But I had no intention of working in education. It wasn't until I got asked to sit on that charter school board. And it was a school here in New Orleans that I really admired. When you walk in a school and you feel like, holy mackerel, this is the school. I want to go to school here. Look at all these teachers. They're all engaged. Look at all these posters. Look at all this. So I walked into Wilson and I was like, this is school, right? And Wilson had no choice at the time but to be a charter because that was the only way post-Katrina this public school could come back and operate, right? And so I joined the charter school board as an investment banker who had no experience working in ed, right? And then that happened, and then my friend Amber, who I had gone to graduate school with in New York, who had decided to move to New Orleans with a fellowship, met Larry, and Larry told her his story about teaching, about how he stumbled into teaching, right? And like at his alma mater, and he was coaching, and one of his former teachers was like, you're really, really good at this, and like, you should really do this, right? Things happened, and he unfortunately couldn't keep teaching. But she gave him this application for a fellowship called Echoing Green. And we were like, well, how do we impact the life of Black boys and men? Because that's what the fellowship was about.
Yeah.
And after thinking about writing, right? That was the first thing we wanted to think about writing. We wanted to connect young men to reading through writing about things that they care about,
and
right?
there is a symbiotic relationship. Yes.
Right. But we couldn't figure out how to make it work. And so another teacher from Memphis, a white woman from Memphis, was at a dinner. And she taught for years in Memphis, and she decided to retire in New Orleans. And she looked at me and she said, you know what y'all need to figure out is how to get more Black men to teach. She's like, post-Katrina and all these other urban cities around the country with charter schools coming, Teach for America has become the biggest sort of pipeline, right? Yes. And she's like, in that pipeline is mostly white suburban women, and that's not going to work. The connection, there's no connect, right? And so we created Brothers in Power to Teach, and we've been off to the races ever since. And I said a lot, but I'm going to just sum up what Brothers in Power to Teach does very quickly. So our goal is to inspire and incentivize Black men to teach, right? And we do that by starting with young men while they're in college. at their sophomore year, which is the pain point at which they break out.
Yes.
Drop out by spring semester of sophomore year. We incentivize it by paying them a stipend because we know that Black students, unlike their white counterparts who can take unpaid internships, miss out on opportunities to get to work training because they can't afford to not get paid, right?
Yes.
And we wanted to give them a actual tangible sense of connection. So we say we spoon feed education to them by starting them off at an after school program so they get used to working with kids, and then they work in our school program here in a local school. And we combine that with personal and professional development to help them navigate their own life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to get professional skills that whether they choose to teach or not, they can take out into the world, right?
Transferable skills, yes,
right.
yes.
And so what we've seen is that, like, by making that connection and making it relevant, just like reading, like you're talking about, like making reading relevant to young people, by making teaching relevant, we're surprised to see how many young people are like, well, I thought about teaching, but my mama told me not to, my grandmama told me not to, my favorite teacher told me not to. And I really love working with kids. And like,
Right.
I have students who leave us and don't go teach and then call me later and say, so can you be a recommendation for me? Because I'm trying to get this teaching job.
Exactly.
So, 80% of our graduates go on to work in education in somewhere.
Fantastic.
Right. And of those 80, 65% teach. So we have a pretty good record.
Yes.
And and we try to make this connection for them, not just through the sort of relationship part, but as we're building out the training, we want to make sure that we have reading as a science as a part of what they learn and understand.
Absolutely.
Because it'll help them as readers, and it'll also help their students as readers.
Absolutely.
So that's where we are.
Absolutely. Well, I love so much what you guys are doing. I'm really, really struck by you're talking about the writing aspect of reading. We both have that in common, but also this whole idea that reading is a science. And I think that's an area around reading that many people get wrong. You'd be surprised how many educators don't know that as well. And so in addition to being, a library and education professional, I also have a consulting business, Higher Learning Unlimited. And so, my motto is untapping the potential for every learner. And a part of what I do in my consulting work is I do a lot of trainings around literacy and literature and reading. And I usually give, a quick little quiz. And I ask the question, is reading a natural process? And when I tell you, at least about 75% of people will say it is a natural process, but reading is not a natural process.
Not at all.
It is not. It is a systematic process, but it is not a natural process. Now, we are communicative as humans, but the process of writing words and communicating ideas in a written way is not natural. It must be taught. So when I tell you, you can almost blow minds, because for so long people think that, and that it is natural, because they can read, they were taught to read. They don't really remember how they learned to read, but now they can read. But it is a process. It does take time. Most children can learn. In fact, overwhelmingly, children can learn reading at about 95% rate. 95% children can learn to read, but we have 5%, and we don't want to lose any readers who need that specific, very detailed instruction, because there may be some cognitive delays that we must address. But it's so wonderful for us to know that 95% of our children can be proficient readers. And so what does that say to us as educators, as librarians? There is a gap that we must address, because why aren't our children reading like they should? Part of that, one of the big reasons why, is because our educators don't have the proficiency in the teaching of reading, which is a science, okay? And so if we don't train pre-service educators to be able to deal with what we know is a problem of great magnitude, how do we reach our readers? And when I learned that about 16%, only about 16% of educators coming out of school have the ability to teach reading. It blew my mind. Blew my mind. So what that really means is if you really recognize that gap, and all teachers do, you have to be somebody that has an additional motivation to get the training and the know-how to be able to stand in the gap. And so I was one of those people when I was a classroom teacher, when I became a librarian. But I really think about it. Why should somebody have to go and do something extra when we know that this is a thing that we can prepare teachers for at the onset? What we also know, if we're going to keep it real, and I'm all about that, is that if this was a plight plaguing white children, we would have taken care of that a long time ago.
Right.
And when we know that the majority of our teachers and our librarians are white women, we also see a disconnect. Now, does that mean that if you're a white female educator or librarian, you can't stand in the gap? Absolutely not. You must stand in the gap if we're going to make a difference. And that's a part of what my book expresses, that you have to stand in the gap. When you see what's going on, you know that there is a role for you to play. It's not what's wrong with Black boys. It's not what they're not doing and what they don't have. It's about historical racism and a current situation that is underserving our readers. And we have to address it.
Yeah, we say all the time at Brothers Empowered to Teach that just because you're a Black educator doesn't mean you're culturally competent, and just because you're a white educator doesn't mean that you aren't.
Absolutely.
Right? I think the gap you're talking about in terms of white librarians is the same we see as with white teachers, right?
Yes.
So one of the things that happened out of Brothers Empowered to Teach is that, like, we keep putting Black men in these schools, right? And we start to ask ourselves, are we putting them in a poisoned well? Because just like Black boys are having this negative experience a lot of times in classrooms and are kind of left behind. I mean, think about my own little brother, right? Like,
yeah,
my experience at Shaker Heights High School, that's where I graduated from. My last year of school, I went to Shaker. I had a great experience, right? Like, I had some great teachers, etc. But we also know that Shaker tracks, right? So if you're on the right track, then you're gonna have a great experience.
Right.
Not on that track, you may not have a great experience.
You may not.
And there's a lot of Black boys who are sitting in the back of classrooms unengaged, right?
Right.
Disengaged, and who are, even though they're silent, treated like threats, right?
Yes.
And that has to check out all the way, right? And then you start to think, I imagine that if I was having a negative experience at school, right, and reading is attached to school,
right,
I'm not interested, right?
Right. And I'm already struggling to do it in the first place. And I don't see myself in what's being presented to me. And then the educators who are charged with presenting information to me, whether it be through a book itself, a short reading text, I'm getting that vibe that they don't really honor, respect, know, understand what's important for me. I'm obviously going to check out. Obviously going to check out.
Right.
Yes.
And I mean, and so what we try to do is at Brothers Empowered to Teach is make that engaging. And honestly, out of that poison well conversation came this conversation about when we're doing our teacher training, when we're doing our pre-teacher training, which we call the teacher development lab, like, what's important for us to know. And one of the things we decided is there's so many Black men who are STEM majors, right? They're math, science, etc. But they struggle to write and read. They struggle to write, right?
Exactly.
And like, and writing to me, you know, you were saying reading is resistance, right? Writing is like what comes out of that reading.
Oh, absolutely.
You know what I mean? And so I'm proud of them for being bioengineering majors. I'm proud of them for doing that kind of stuff, right? But when I read your paper and I really can't understand your ideas clearly,
yes,
then you're missing an opportunity, right?
Yes.
And so what we decided to do, through the help of there's a company called the Center for Developmental Learning, which is all about the five core pieces of the science, reading as a science.
Yes.
Is put in our development lab. So we're doing early childhood development, right? So you can understand how the brain develops, because this is another thing that educators are missing, is that we are blowing past early childhood development, right?
Yes.
How the brain works.
Which is pivotal. Yes.
Right? Which is why so many people don't believe that 95% of children can learn to read, right? Because they don't understand early childhood development, right?
Exactly.
So if there's certain things that are missing in your learning your executive function, and then it becomes harder for you as you get older because you didn't get them during your spongy years, right?
Absolutely.
So put their early childhood development in there. We're like, great. And we're like, one of the most important things in early childhood development is like letters, sounds, etc.
That's right. Phonemic awareness. Absolutely.
So we decided to put early childhood development and reading as a science into this culturally competent training, so that when our fellows come out, whether they teach or not, they're getting 3 years of training and understanding that their fellow teachers may not have, right?
Right. And that's marquee. That is marquee that you guys have. It will make them such standouts. So even if they don't become practitioners as educators, they'll probably go on to have children, and that will be a skill set that will serve them well, or they'll have children in their family. There'll be some young people who will benefit from that knowledge. We can all benefit from the knowledge. And, you know, it also kind of makes me think about too, how very often in the Black community and the Latino community, how our parents can sometimes be seen as culprits around our children's you know, lack of proficiency in reading. And I always fight against that. And I say this to educators, I say this to community leaders. I was a part of a forum in Cleveland back in 2016, 2017, and we kind of had roundtable discussions about how to get, you know, our kids on track with reading. And I can't tell you how many stakeholders were saying parents have to be more engaged. And I just had to pump the brakes on that, because what I know from personal experience, what I know as an educator, as a librarian, as a literacy professional, is that in the scope of a school day, we can teach children to read. We can do that. If we have the skills, we can deliver proficient children. Now, reading practice, is that a thing? Absolutely. Can parents play a role in reading practice? Absolutely. But even absent reading practice doesn't mean that our children can't be proficient. So we're proficient. We're not going to push that on the parents and families. They send us
a lot of stuff on the
families, don't we? They send us the very best children they have. And it's our job to give them the very best that we have. And it's also our job to own it when we don't bring our very best. So we got to bring our A game if we want them to bring their A game. So I say, that's not it. My mother, who has a high school education, my dad had a high school education. My maternal grandmother had my mother at 15, had to leave middle school. My aunt, high school education, they were voracious readers. So like your family, I became a reader because I watched reading model. My mother worked at the East Cleveland Public Library. I went to East Cleveland Public Schools before I went to parochial schools in third grade. And I had a wonderful, enriching experience in the East Cleveland Public Schools. I saw myself, I had Black teachers.
My dad, class of 1972, Shaw High School.
Is that all right now?
The band from Shaw comes to New Orleans every Mardi Gras. And every year I record it and I'm like, listen, watch this band.
Yes, they are second to none. They are, yes, absolutely. I remember that going down Euclid, walking my sister and I, watching that band, following the band. But I had those experiences. My mother was a clerk at the East Cleveland Public Library. So I would walk from school, go to the library, you know, do my research. So that was my playground, if you will. And so at 6 years old, I remember reading The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison because I could. Now, The Bluest Eye, of course, is an adult piece of literature. I couldn't understand The Bluest Eye the way an adult should, but because I was a reader and I was able to read well, I was attracted to the book and I was able to read the book. I also, you know, I knew about that book. What I liked about it is I saw a little Black girl on the cover of the book. She was holding a little white doll with blue eyes, and that struck me. I didn't know what that was all about, but that's what drew me in to reading. And so while my mother was a voracious reader, my grandmother, my aunt, they never set me on their knee and read to me. So when I hear these, you know, stories about how you must read to a child every day and sit them on your lap and all of that, again, That's a wonderful thing if you're a parent that's able to do that. But absent that, children can still be very enriched and become very adept, critically thinking readers. We have to do our work. We have to create the environments. We also have to understand how our parents live daily and invite them into the experience, understanding that many of our parents aren't literate either. But what we must not do is blame the victims.
Right. You know, there's a program that another fellow Clevelander, Kelly Harris DeBerry, whose book recently came out, Freedom is My Name, plug for Kelly.
All right.
Who connected me with you all at the Great Lakes African American Writers Conference. She used to run a program here in New Orleans, whose name I cannot recall, but it was a family reading program. And so the idea was that families would get together and there was a book, and that, you know, parents and children would get to discuss it together, et cetera, because of that issue that a lot of our parents are not literate, right? And we have to remember that a lot of our parents had terrible experiences in school, and they too were left behind. So we can't expect that all of a sudden they have a positive experience because their children are in school. And I think we sometimes fail to realize that when parents show up at school and angry fight mode, right? It's because they had to fight when they were in school.
Absolutely.
You already know that a lot of times they're coming to school, and even if it's something good, they're so used to you calling home about something bad.
Right. Exactly.
Exactly. And you want to engage parents, like, you know, parents don't have to read you. You can have your kid read to you, right?
Exactly.
This book, tell me what that book says, right?
Exactly.
I think there are ways that we can help parents engage in small ways, right? That take 5 minutes. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Right? You don't have to, you know, I benefited from a village of readers, right? So my grandparents lived next door to this woman, Miss Bagley, on Sutton Place. Miss Bagley, every time she came back from a road trip, she had this library in her house. She had all these children's books that she would collect. And I'd be visiting my grandparents, and she would call me and say, come over and pick out a book. And so I would pick out a book every time, right?
Right.
I would read the book to her, and I go on home, right?
Exactly.
And I just think about all the ways that I learned to engage in reading in a way that was helpful. And I see the exact opposite so often with Black boys. It's like, you must read, you need to read, you gotta read, you blah, blah, blah. There's no wonder in it, right?
Exactly.
There's no adventure in it. There's just task.
Yes.
And so the work we do with the fellows, we say it's carrot and stick. We engage them with the money, right? But we also try to give them the history of education and let them understand, like, how we got here, why we're here, why the system is the way it is, right? And then, you know, one of the questions when we did our pre-discussion was like, how does literacy get engaged in our work at Brothers in Power to Teach? Besides the training that we have, we also give them a copy of The Fire Next Time.
Oh, yes, Baldwin, yes.
And we will be giving them another book, which I forget the name of the book, but we'll be giving them another book when they leave us. And we also take them, you know, we engage them in history, which I think a lot of times interests people. Like I've seen the light bulb go off for them when we walk through the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, right?
Right.
And they learn all these things, like about Fannie Lou Hamer and others who, you know, didn't have high school educations, but were also readers, right? They were voracious readers.
Right.
And that influenced their fight. Even if they were just, you know, they were like, not Fannie Lou, but she was a pastor. She was a fiery preacher. Ooh, I can see her face. It's not Fannie Lou. But anyway, I'll think about it.
Fannie Lou will do it though.
Yes.
Yes.
Who was it from Chicago? Ida B. Wells. That's who. Ida B.
Wells
was a preaching woman. Yes. Right? When she got married, that stadium was filled with 20,000 people to watch her get married.
Yes.
But she read the Bible. She knew the Bible backwards and forwards, right?
Right.
Even in there, like, I think engaging people in reading in a way that piques their interest is really important. And I think we failed to do that in modern education.
Right.
I think we make education so much about getting a job that there is no critical diving in of understanding, you know?
Right. Like, and again, because so much of reading historically has been asking children of color to read stories about others and not themselves, not seeing themselves in stories. And so we know seeing ourselves is affirming. It tells us that we're here, that we're important, that we matter. If somebody gives you a picture, if your sixth grade class, the first thing you're going to look for is what? Yourself. You're going to look in that picture and look for yourself among your classmates. Once you do that, you might start to, oh, that was my best friend. I remember so-and-so. But you're going to look for yourself first. That is natural. And our children haven't been given that opportunity in the way that they should. Are things starting to change? Yes. Slowly they are, but they're still not where they need to be. And particularly for our boys who, you know, in most contexts as it relates to school, when they go into school libraries, there is a heavy reliance on literature and not those informational nonfiction texts that tend to attract our boys. So, you know, we got to think about it. You know, we got to think about who's telling the story. We've got to think about what stories are being told. We've got to think again, connecting those dots. What's the historical context so that our children understand that reading is about thinking, that reading should not be seen as a chore. It should not be seen as a task, because what we know historically is a lot of times what we tell children when they get in trouble, go read a book, you know,
like
that's
punishment.
that is a punishment.
Right.
You know, we don't engage around reading. We don't discuss around reading. We got to find a way in with our boys. And that's about building those relationships. Because once we build those relationships, then as library professionals, education professionals, then we can find out what is the thing for that individual Black boy. So yeah, they have commonalities. They've been underserved as a whole, but each of them are uniquely wonderful and different. And we have to find out through those relationships what those things are. And so we are, as Oprah says, we are teachers, but we are students. So we also have to rely on our boys to be experts in what it is that they desire. They may not have the language for it. They can't call off a book list to you of the best authors to address their needs, but that's what you're for as the professional. But you have to have that ear that will hear them, that will affirm them, that will be readers yourself. And that was one of the challenges that I faced with some of my public library youth professionals is you got to read it. You got to get engaged. You got to learn to love it, because that natural love that you have, that fervor, will be able to connect with our boys. They'll know, oh my goodness, that's something that she really likes. I've already developed a relationship with this person. They've connected with me. They respect me. And what we know about our children is if we love them, they will love us. And if they love us, they'll go through the fire for us. And even when they struggle, they'll work hard to make us proud of them. And so we have to leverage that power to make sure we're connecting with our boys.
Absolutely. I mean, that is one of the starting points for Brothers in Power to Teach, is all about relationship building, which is why we start with them when they're in an after school program, right? And we see from our perspective, when Black men are in schools teaching, that there's a little bit of jealousy or envy from our white educators about the relationships they build. But we know it's crucial, and that's what, and actually that little bit of envy makes us know it's crucial, right? Because we can, you know, our students are not necessarily, they're not teachers yet, right? They're in undergrad. They're not education majors. People ask us that all the time. Black men are not majoring in education. So if you're looking for Black men teachers, they're not in education majors. Maybe they're like less than 10% of all ed majors, right? But we're piquing their interest in their other subject matters, and they're becoming experts in those. And you can see exactly what you said about students being willing to go through the fire, right? So like there are many times I have examples of young men, because we also have young women in our program, who there's a student who's just struggling, right? They're behaviorally struggling, they're not engaged in class, etc. And there's something about their relationship with our fellow that fellow is able to get them to do their homework, to go back in the classroom, to pay attention, to, like, you know, etc. And that's crucial. And it's crucial in, you know, there's many statistics. There's a report from Johns Hopkins University that came out in 2017 that talks about the fact that if you have just one Black educator in the third, fourth, and fifth grade, you have a 40% chance higher rate of a young, poor Black person from a Black or Latino person from an urban community going on to graduate college, going on to graduate high school, right? We know that just teachers speaking life into children, they don't even have to have the skills to be able to teach you.
Exactly.
Influences your education in a huge trajectory. My great grandmother, who raised my mother, You know, she might have had a 6th grade education, right? She knew her numbers, she knew all those things. She couldn't necessarily check my
She knew
mother's
how to
homework.
read, write, and
Right,
count her money, as my great
right,
grandmother would say.
right,
Yes.
right, exactly. She didn't
Yes.
necessarily know about biology or chemistry
Right.
or whatever. She read my mother's homework to make sure she wrote it to the completed it, right?
Right.
And she made sure she went to school every day, and
Right.
that her grades were good, right? So
Right.
this level of engagement, we're saying that parents who are now working more than they've ever worked before, who have less of a village than they had before,
Yes.
need to be doing all these things. Well, we know so many grandparents and parents who couldn't do none of that,
That's
right?
right.
And you and I are both voracious readers.
Right.
And I had my grandparents on one side who were voracious readers, and my great grandmother who was not, but she knew education was important.
Exactly.
And she expected you to go to school, right?
Exactly. Because no one rises to low expectations.
Nobody
right?
rises to low expectations. That's
Absolutely. And so
right.
when I'm hearing you talk about the history of your family, and just that story is almost every Black family story. You know, you had people who did not have the benefit, but had that high expectation, who then produced children who had the benefit. So fast forward to today, 2020, in a remote learning environment where our parents are the essential infrastructure and having to go to work. And the expectation is still now that they become quasi-educators. It is a bridge too far. And so again, our role now becomes even more critical and important, because the world is now being able to see what was going on in the schoolhouse is being able to be illuminated throughout our entire community, that we have not been effectively serving our children, and we've got to get with the program.
We have 88 charter schools in the city of New Orleans. That means we have about 40 something school districts, because every charter management organization is its own district, right? We have, each school has a different process by which they're doing online learning, or they're doing hybrid. So I think last week we were able to return to school in person. Well, we've done had 2 hurricane warnings since then. So it's been a false start and a real start. And so they're back in school. But what I can say is, this is gonna make somebody angry. It's okay. I'm gonna say it though.
That's it.
Say,
girl, I got your back. I got your back.
And you can tell them I said it. There is a reactiveness in public education that further widens the equity gap, right?
Yes.
So we've had, since March, COVID, we went into lockdown in March, right? We had 6 months to figure out what the online remote planning would be.
Girl, yes.
Right? 6 months. But we were had our eyes so far down the road about these babies going back to school in person.
Yes.
That some of us just decided to pick up the school day and put it online.
Yes.
And have you and I sitting in front of this computer for 8 hours with my hands clasped like this and my uniform on and nothing behind me. And then wonder why children are not behaving, right?
Exactly.
And parents are exposed to that. They're seeing what's happening.
They're seeing it.
But also, we also didn't consider families, right? So like if I'm a working professional, I don't have I'm fortunate enough to work from home, which only 30% of all Americans can work from home.
Exactly.
I don't have the ability to sit here and supervise my child on this laptop for 8 hours, right? Don't penalize me for that. This is why adult learners have asynchronous and synchronous online learning, right?
Exactly.
So I can give a student 2.5 hours of instruction a day, and then let them learn some things and learn some life skills, because they're around, right?
And engage around that. Absolutely.
If we thought about it critically, but we didn't. Right.
And we're floundering. And it's visible.
Right.
Yes.
And we're floundering.
Yes.
And we are having students get in trouble for reaching around and plugging their laptop because they're not looking right at you.
Right.
It's a mess. And so I think also when it comes to ELA, or English Learning Arts, that we are also reactive, right? We're like, here, let's just give them, just change the test, right?
Yes.
This, right? Sight words are not going to teach you how to read.
That's right. Right.
And so we have some work to do, and we can do it if we want to do it.
If we want, that's the key. Right. That's the key. Are we compelled to do we want to do this work?
Right.
The question, I ask myself, is that a problem? We have to ask ourselves, is that a problem for us? For many of us, it is a problem, but it has to be a problem for everybody. And
Right.
we have to understand that if we don't make a difference, everybody's, affected. So just as Fannie Lou Hamer said, if everybody ain't free, and none of us free. And we've got to be able to connect that to what we do with our Black boys as it relates to reading, as it relates to education. And we have to own the fact that there have been systems that have been built, developed, have thrived on our unsuccess or our lack of success. And those systems are afraid that if we really give our children the tools that they need, if we give them a level playing field, they're going to have a stratospheric level of success that hasn't yet been seen. And so we have to call a thing a thing. We have to decide, and do I dare disturb the universe? Because I'm now talking specifically to African-American, Latino educators and librarians. We have to decide that we are resistant, that we are not going to be a part of the power structure that has for too long not served our children. And so many of us have that, mentality that we've gotten an education, that we know how to do the code switch. We're in the jobs. Our children are taken care of. And sometimes we can be a part of the same systems that are oppressing our children. So we got to get real clear on that and what we are going to do to make a difference so that we all succeed.
So I'm gonna say one thing, and then I'm gonna ask you one question, and then we can wrap this, I think, up and let the editors do what they do. But
yes,
when you talk about resistance, my partner Larry and I always think of us as building an army, right? We're building an army of educators who are culturally competent, who believe in the excellence of Black children, and who challenge them to be their best.
Yes.
I do think from my community, that what I bring to the work is my community development experience, and my community development experience says this, that in the 1980s, we all moved to we all got these corporate jobs, right?
Ooh.
We used to say back in the day, parents used to say back in the day, get you a good government job when you graduated.
Get a good government job, yep.
Right. So then it became get a good government job or get a good corporate job, right? And we bought into this idea of, the nuclear family separate in a suburban community, right? Disconnected, right?
Yes.
And now we see that disconnection in everything that we do.
In everything.
And that we have to get reconnected, and we have to demand excellence of our children, and we have to expect that they can be excellent.
Yes.
Right? Yes. I also think we have to make space for children to be who they are, right?
Absolutely.
And come from the communities where they come from. So
unapologetically.
Right. I live in New Orleans. New Orleans got its own lingo. It might as well be its own country. They say it's the most northern Caribbean island, right? And what I see every day here is people trying to take the New Orleans out of children, trying to take their language from them, trying to take how they, they do these things.
Trying to fix them. Trying to fix something that's not broken.
Fix something that's not broken. And there's a saying that says, as New Orleans goes, so goes the world, right?
There you go.
And a lot of the things that have happened in post-Katrina New Orleans are so goes the world. The gentrification, the privatization of public education is seen as a job, not as a thing that is going to free you, right? And so what I challenge us to do is to get reconnected, right?
Yes.
Get reconnected to the children in your neighborhood, get reconnected to the children in your community, get reconnected to the children. If you go to church, get connected to those children, get connected, right?
Right.
And celebrate their culture, right?
That's right.
We listen, now we done assimilated, we done gone to corporate America, we can speak English, and we still getting shot in the street.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. So it don't matter whether you the Harvard educated bird watcher or you George Floyd. Right? Let's keep it real.
Let's keep it real. So if that's the case, then let's just be ourselves.
Be ourselves. Our wonderful, splendid Black and brown selves. Let's do that. We got to ask ourselves, are we ready? We got to look inside first. Are we ready? We've got to do the internal work, and then we can turn it around and make a real difference. One of my monikers here, you know, because I have such a historical relationship with Atlanta as well. You know, I had the good fortune to be an HBCU graduate. I'm a graduate of Clark Atlanta University. And, you know, that experience is second to none. That's a whole nother conversation we'll have at another time, but it is life altering for African-American students that have that opportunity. You know, I left here, went to graduate school, came back when I had my own children. I purposely came back to Atlanta as a Black Mecca because I wanted my girls to see what it was like to be a Black person who achieves, who thrives, who grows, and who loves their Blackness. It makes sure that, again, that we're not looking down on somebody unless we're doing so because we're helping to pull them up. We're all in this together. So one of my monikers is I'm an abolitionist in Atlanta. I'm here doing all that I can to help free minds, bodies, and souls, and remind our children that they are Black, that they are beautiful, that they are resplendent. You're here for a purpose, on purpose, and all of us are in this together. It's time to do the work.
And Black folks have a network. You don't have to have somebody else's network. I went to PWI. I went to New York University. I'm appreciative of living in New York City on New York University's dime for 4 years, right? I had the fortune of going to the New School as well, which is a much better experience for another call, another day. But I will say this, my friends who went to HBCUs, those HBCUs expected excellence out of them, first of all. Second of all, somebody noticed when you weren't doing right or doing well, right? And they probably have a better network with their fellow graduates than I do, right? And so we keep trying to get
we put out professional, successful people at African Americans at much greater rates than any PWI schools do. It's just out there. We do.
Absolutely. My friends who live in DC graduated from North Carolina A&T and got 6-figure jobs.
Hey,
3 years graduating, right?
Won't we do it?
Right. Won't he? So, and I think those networks are important, and I think it's important for us to get engaged. And you know, whether you went to an HBCU or you went to a PWI, we're being called.
That's right.
We're being called to do the work, and we're being called to get folks to read. You know, reading is crucial, and Americans in general don't read. What's happening with Black folks is a microcosm of what's happening in America.
You better believe it. Say it again, girl. They act like just Black folks don't read, but people don't read.
Right. Americans do not read. Right. Americans don't read newspapers. Americans don't read nonfiction books. Americans do not read. So it's not that Black people are less reading than others. We are not reading as a country, and that has been demonstrated by the lack of people's ability to do research.
And to critically think. We have a person that's operating the highest position in our government right now who is completely illiterate, and it bears it out on Twitter just about every day. And he is one of the last vestiges of white supremacy and white privilege, because he is a demonstration of how a white person can ascend to the highest level of government with the lowest level of proficiency. And so we have to work against that and say it isn't okay, it isn't so, and build up our children to be the absolute best that they were put here to be. The ability is there. We've got to create the space.
So we got to stop being in our houses. You know, all of the things that have happened in the last 20 years, if you ask me, is because of this. Like we've been receding into home, right? If you look at the Black church, for example, which was such a crucial part of the civil rights movement for, you know, in education, the Black church is now insular, right?
Insular,
like you're in a big old mega church, right? And I ain't got no problem with mega church. You want to go to mega church, fine. But the church is in a building, and it's not
because the church is the people, right?
Right. It's not extending his hand. It's a personification. It's a personification of humanity, really.
Right.
You know what I mean? We're doing the same in our communities where we don't go outside, right?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
In New Orleans, where you speak. If you walk past my doorstep, you best speak. If not, in New Orleans, we're gonna be like, oh, you don't speak? Oh, okay.
Right.
When the hurricane come, I don't know what to tell you. I'm gonna check on Miss Rhonda, right?
Exactly.
And so we have to do this work, and we have to do this work in reading, and we have to read ourselves, right? Like
Yes.
let's model reading. You don't have to read, The Bluest Eye, which is a complicated book, even as an adult. Great read,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
You could read Sharonda Rhimes, A Year of Yes, a very simple 8th grade read book, but it's
Right.
like encouraging. Like we need to read.
Right.
Um, and we need to encourage ourselves to read. And
Right.
even if it's audiobooks, you need to engage your
Read with,
brain,
yes. It's about
right?
relationships.
Right.
Yes. Yes. It's
So
about thinking.
my
Yes.
last question to you is,
Uh-huh.
tell me your favorite nonfiction book and your favorite fiction book.
Oh my goodness.
Pick one.
Okay.
It can't even pick one. It doesn't have to be a
Gosh, now you know what us librarians will all say. There's so many, but I will say that my favorite nonfiction book would probably be the autobiography of Malcolm X. So although it was, as told to Alex Haley, was a biography of autobiography of his life, and he was transformative for me. So another conversation, I changed my name when I graduated from college to Shabazz. And it was in homage to Malcolm X. And it was because he was such a strong, intelligent, transformative human being. And I felt like, I was moving in that direction again, having had that HBCU experience. I left Clark Atlanta University, went to another HBCU for graduate school, Morgan State University in Baltimore, where I studied.
I lived in Baltimore.
Did you?
Baltimore.
Yeah, Baltimore. And hey, guess what? Their motto is the city that reads. Baltimore
Right.
is.
I lived on the other side of the lake from Baltimore, from Morgan
Oh,
State, as a matter
okay.
of fact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So also another great city that has its own unique character. Absolutely love that.
That city is secretly pro-black. Nobody knows it.
Oh,
Like,
yes,
so many
ma'am.
people in Baltimore have dreadlocks. When I moved to
Oh, yes, ma'am.
Baltimore, I was like,
And I
oh
don't
my
know how
goodness,
secret it is, honey, because I knew it from the time I got there.
right,
Yeah,
right,
yeah. So
right.
another great city, leaving Atlanta and then going to Baltimore. But during that time is when I changed my name. So now at 51 years old, I've been Nicole Shabazz longer than I was Nicole Stoner, which was my given last name. So I would say that as a nonfiction text, and I would just compel every human being to read his story. He is so misunderstood and misquoted and not given the respect that I feel he deserves. I think he's up there with Martin Luther King and all of our great leaders. And I just think we've missed the mark. And that's also our responsibility as Black people to make sure we lift him. I would say, as far as literature goes, J. California Cooper, who I absolutely, she wrote a lot of her books in dialect, but she had a book called The Wake of the Wind. And it is fiction, but it's historical fiction. I mean, and she is a person that can tell a Black story for a person who can barely read to a person who has the highest level of education and make it resonate. She tells our stories, she affirms us, she keeps it real, but she makes it so that any reader can come through that door and have that most engaging experience. What about you?
So my favorite nonfiction book is The Warmth of Other Suns by by Wilkerson.
It's a good, Now Cash just came out. You got to
I
check
know
that one
it.
out.
I ordered it. It's not here
Yeah.
yet. I ordered it. And my favorite nonfiction book, Gloria Naylor is my favorite fiction author. And she wrote a book called Linden Hills. And I really identify with a lot of the things that happen in that book. In terms of sort of this like upwardly mobile, go up the hill Black story.
Right.
And I really identify with The Warmth of Other Suns because my grandfather was the family historian.
Yeah.
So in addition to the stories that drive me around Cleveland and telling me the history, I also know the story of our family migration from the plantation in Tennessee to Kansas City, Missouri to right here in Louisiana to Cleveland. And those stories are the stories of my grandparents and their friends. Yes. So when I read The Warmth of Other Suns, the Great Migration is my favorite history period.
Yeah.
So I really, really love that book. And as a matter of fact, I'm getting ready to reread it because I've just
Okay, I got it over there on my shelf too. Yeah, and everything I hear you saying and that I'm saying and that what we're really saying about the Black boys we serve, me, you know, in the K through 12 space, you in the post-secondary space, they're all about relevance and resonance. That's why they're our favorite books, and we have to find those favorite books for our Black boys.
And we can do it. And we need to stop. And we need to stop making it punishment. And
That's right.
We need to ask them what they're interested in, and then go read that book that might interest them. Like my friend Desiree Evans, who reads all of the young adult fiction and then passes it on to her students. We need to do the same, so that we can be one. So we can be like, "Wow, this book is great. And you're gonna love it." And you know, I'll say this is the last thing I'm gonna say. I benefited from the Shaker Public Library system from before I went away and moved to New York to when I came back. Like the librarians in that system knew us when we came through the door. They knew what we might want to read. They kind of encouraged us to come off the computer, right?
Yeah.
I'm here for a while. Why don't you come over here and let me tell you about this book, right? Right. It can be done, you know?
Yes. And likewise, I benefited from my East Cleveland Public Library experience early on from 5 or 6, years old on. It was the same thing. They knew my name. And you know how, I don't know if you remember, because I'm a little older than you, but the TV show Cheers, where everybody knows your name and, they would go into the bar.
I watch
it was the
every
same
Thursday.
Thing. Okay. But it was the same thing in libraries. They knew my name. They saw me. They affirmed me. They understood me. When that new book came out, they could direct me to it. It's about building those relationships. We can do it. And guess what? We must do it.
We must, because relationships is how you get people to learn, period. And then whether I teach you how to boil water or I teach you statistics, relationship is how we get there.
Is how we get there.
Well, I'm so glad we got to have this conversation. Yes. It was awesome. I hope you
enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too. I hope the people who are watching this enjoyed it. And, give them everybody the title of your book again, and the name of your consulting firm, and how they can reach you. And I'll do the same.
Yes. So the name of the book is Engaging Boys of Color at the Library, Proven Strategies for Reading Achievement. Again, that book will be out summer 2021. My library literacy and learning consulting is Higher Learning Unlimited. And you can reach me at my email address, Nicole, Nichole, Shabazz, S-H-A, B as in boy, A, 2 Z's as in zebra, @gmail.com. I look forward to connecting with many of you. Thanks so much for tuning in today.
And my name is Kristyna Jones, and I'm the co-founder of Brothers Empowered to Teach, and the newly installed Chief Executive Officer of Cypher 360, which is us taking this training about how to become a great relationship building educator with the literacy teaching skills you need. And that's coming to you soon. And you can find Brothers Empowered to Teach at BE2T.org. We are expanding across the country. Right now we're in South Louisiana. The COVID has slowed down the expansion to Jackson and Memphis. But if you want Brothers Empowered to Teach in your town, just find us there. You can also find us on Instagram at RealBruzTeach, BRUHS Teach. And you can find us on Twitter at that same handle. And my email address is Nicole, Nicole, Jones.
All right.
@gmail.com. And thanks again for having us today. And
you know what? Let me throw in my social media. I forgot about that. So you can reach me on Twitter at I am that THAT lit LIT lady. And you can find me on Instagram at I am that THAT Choc, CHOC lit LIT lady. Yes. Connect.
I am that lit lady. I love it. I am that chocolate lady. I got that.